Good morning. How are you all doing? Welcome to the session that's so nice that they're making us do it twice. So this is the first of two presentations. So my name is Mark Simos, lead cybersecurity architect at Microsoft. I'm also security forum chair at the Open Group standards body. And I have with me some awesome colleagues on the stage. I got Ulf Larsson from SEB Bank from Sweden. I can't remember what it stands for right off the top of my head, sorry. And Murugiah Souppaya from NIST.
Good morning.
And the presence of these folks here is not an accident. Security is a complex topic, and we wanted to share a couple of different key perspectives to help bring clarity. The security is kind of like this very complex 3D object, and we want you to have different lenses, different cameras, so you can see it more clearly. So obviously I bring the Microsoft and the technology perspective. Ulf brings the perspective of having actually deployed this for real. And Murugiah brings the NIST and the standards and the perspective they have of bringing all sorts of vendors into the lab. And they'll be talking a little bit more about that as we go. So today we're going to be focusing on the top 10 security controls you can implement now. Very much focused on giving you something actionable you can walk away with and start working on when you get home or maybe next Monday. So we'll start with a quick introduction to Zero Trust, what it is, why it matters, and some learnings from the NIST experience in the Cyber Center of Excellence Labs. We're going to talk about the top 10 security controls in the real world, where Ulf is going to share his perspective, learnings from implementing these, and what works well, what was a little bit surprising, et cetera. And what didn't work and had to take a little bit more time. And some key takeaways, next steps, and resources to help you on your journey, including getting the project justified. So we know that's a very, very important part of it. So we're going to start with a little bit with the attackers, because the reality is we have a bunch of attackers out there. They operate often in safe haven countries, so there is no legal recourse when they attack your organization. So they're pretty much able to do whatever they want across the internet. These attackers tend to be pretty practical. They're very pragmatic. They follow the path of least resistance. So there's an existing tool. There's a toolkit that will do it. If it's easy, they will do it. And an illustration from this is from the Microsoft Digital Defense Report. I kind of call it the Pac-Man and the pellet. That big red block there is the password attacks we see by volume on our customers and their accounts. The MFA attacks that we see is a much smaller piece, that little pellet. And I'd rather be dealing with that small pellet size problem than the big Pac-Man size problem. So that's just kind of an illustration of that. Those slides are in the references for y'all to download later if you want. But these attacker attributes drive us into a mode where we have to be thinking very pragmatically. We would love to be able to block every attack every time. That is simply not possible, it's not feasible, it's not practical, because the attackers are smart, creative, intelligent, well-funded. They get rewarded pretty well for a successful attack. So we have to work as a team to protect our organization and make sure that technology teams, business teams, security teams all see themselves as part of the same mission, enabling the organization and keeping it safe. And we have to prioritize. We have to prioritize ruthlessly. We cannot do everything. We have to do the things that have the most impact first, which is why we have these top 10 controls, and we have to tame complexity. It's got to be simple, which Ulf is going to talk about more later, but it's got to be simple for the humans dealing with it, not just the IT admins and the users, the security team. Every human interacting with these things has to have as much of a simple experience as possible. Complexity is there. We all work in technology. We know how complex these systems are. But you have to make it easy for the people involved. So, Zero Trust itself. We'll talk a little bit about why we talk about Zero Trust and why it exists. So, security has been complex for its entire existence, even dating back to the 80s and 90s when it was all on a LAN and everything was LAN connected, local area network, for those that aren't old enough to remember that. But we had a lot of devices, users, connections. We took a shortcut. It was a very reasonable assumption, a very reasonable shortcut that, hey, we put these wires out there. I've run Cat5 wires into walls. That, hey, the things that are on this network should be safe, and the things that are outside of it are questionable. So let's go ahead and put a barrier and keep everything in it safe. That was a reasonable assumption. But that assumption started falling apart in two different ways. One is the stuff started not appearing on the network. We had cloud, we had mobile devices. Even email attachments in the middle to late 90s started violating this assumption very quickly. And then attackers also got a lot better at getting in. They would send a phishing email. They would say, hey, can you give me your password? Okay. And people did, surprisingly. And they would also, through credential theft and all these other things, they would be able to cross that perimeter. And so that was not a good defensible approach. Zero Trust, very simply, is taking that shortcut out and saying, how do we do security? And that's what Zero Trust answers, is that question. How do we do security when the firewall and the network perimeter and the IDS and IPS are not enough to keep us secure? So that is all that Zero Trust really is a rethinking of security minus that false assumption. So how do we guide ourselves on this journey, this highly complex journey? There's 3 security principles, and then there's a balancing factor of business enablement. We have to look at things from the perspective of, I have to keep my organization running. I don't make money in security. Security does not pay my paycheck, right? Maybe on an individual basis, but it doesn't help the organization actually operate and fund and achieve their mission. It helps protect that mission. So we always have to be thinking about, how do we keep the mission going? How do we keep the organization going while being careful and cautious, knowing that there are attackers out there. So think about it like, I have to get the CEO from the meeting place to the movies for the evening event. I know the CEO needs to get there, but I also know I need to keep the CEO safe. So we have to think about it in that dual perspective at the same time. And then as you drill into each of the different assets, verify explicitly and use least privilege access. You want to make sure that the amount of things that can take control of any given asset, whether it's an application or a device or an identity or a server, a container, you name it, that there is a limited amount of things that can take control of that, and that you know 100% that that is actually the admin that is doing that before you give them access. Secondly, you need to look at the blast radius. If someone does take that over, because we do assume breach, we assume compromise, then do they have things they don't need to have? Do they have access to everything in the environment? Am I carrying those master key rings that I don't need with me to dinner, to the club afterwards? We don't want to be doing that. We want to be limiting the access that these entities have. And you have to apply this thinking across all aspects of security: identity, devices, infrastructure, development, data, all aspects of security, even OT and IoT devices. If you have it, you need to be thinking in these ways. So, Murugiah?
Yep. Thank you, Mark. Thanks for the quick intro on Zero Trust. So I'm Murugiah Souppaya. I'm from NIST. How many people are familiar with NIST or using NIST standard and guidelines, cybersecurity? Great, thank you. So I'm going to go quickly over this slide. It's just a little background slide. So I'm part of the team that developed the NIST cybersecurity standard and guideline for the US government. NIST is part of the Department of Commerce. We developed standard guideline for the US government, but it's also being used quite a bit in the other regulated industry as well. So we have work revolving in at the high level policy, like the NIST cybersecurity framework, all the way down to the crypto standard, like the 3 post-quantum cryptography standard we just published in August. So with the talk today, I'm going to focus more on the technology side, on Zero Trust in particular, and highlight some of the guidance that we have around Zero Trust, but also background guidance around identity management, incident response, recovering from cyber attack. Those are different things that Zero Trust kind of bring together and help us achieve some of those goals. As I mentioned before, we developed documentary standard, guidance, high-level guidance that's product agnostic. But with the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, which is our applied research lab, we're taking those standard and guidelines, and we work with the industry, in particular, technology providers like Microsoft, to actually build out example implementation of the standard to demonstrate that those standards are applicable, implementable, actionable, and we demonstrate that as part of the project that I'm going to talk about. So let's go to our initiative with Zero Trust. Zero Trust is something that got started in 2018, at least for us in the government, where the government is thinking about going in this direction. So NIST kind of brought together a number of folks to develop that initial foundational guidance, which is the NIST Special Publication 800-207, high-level document, talked about the principle and so on. I'll go a little bit deeper into that content on the next slide. But this is kind of our journey. We started with the foundational document, then we bring together a number of industry collaborators and partners to build out example implementation as part of the NCCUE project. And then we publish all our findings in the last couple of years. And we are wrapping up our project. And the final version is going to be released in late December. So look out for that. Mark's going to have a pointer to our project page where you'll be able to learn more about it. And I think what's really cool about this is, Zero Trust is not something that you can actually purchase and deploy. It's really about integrating a number of different cybersecurity solutions that you may already have deployed in your organization, or you being able to identify the gaps of what you currently have to kind of achieve that end goal. So to achieve that with our project, we have to work with a lot of industry collaborators coming in, understanding their technology, be able to integrate it together to build out the solution. And all of that is driven by this foundational document that I mentioned earlier. We talked about the different deployment model for Zero Trust. Identity is really a key component of it. I think Ulf's gonna drill deeper onto some of those elements. But there's multiple ways of achieving Zero Trust, and end-to-end Zero Trust is really how do you focus on identity, you focus on other technology you have already, like network segmentation that you have already maybe deploying your organization, and kind of drill it even higher on the stack at the application level as well. You're getting to a point where you're defining access at a pretty granular level. So the objective of our project, we try and set some scope around it. We focus mainly on regulated industry that has a lot of security and compliance requirement, regulation, and so on as well. We take that foundational document that we produce and trying to put it into action, trying to provide example implementation, working with our industry collaborators. And we focus on IT technology, because the enterprise can be composed of, OT, IoT, as Mark indicated, but we're going to start first with the IT components. Hopefully, that's a foundational piece that you could build upon as you're adding other part of your enterprise to it. And we are looking at commercial off-the-shelf technology. So this is things that are shipping today, available, people can pull together. And how do we actually go about doing this is documenting the use case scenario. At the end of the day, we want to bring value to the organization. So it's all about demonstrating how you can achieve Zero Trust with some very typical use case scenario that's, that folks are facing today. And the final product is documenting all the lessons learned, documenting the implementation that we have in the NIST special publication 1800, which is a practice guide. It's different than the foundational document, the 800 series that I talked a little bit earlier, which is product agnostic. With this, we actually have product version number and guidance on how do you configure this thing, how do you make them work together, and so on and so forth. So drilling a little bit on some of the use case scenario, think about Zero Trust as an enabler technology in a sense. You're facing with providing access to all your users, across the world, with resources being spread like on-prem, in the cloud, maybe multiple cloud even. So how do you kind of allow them to, do their work in an efficient way and secure way as well? So think about Zero Trust, driven by those models.
And if I can go back there for just a moment, I love the use of scenarios because, as we mentioned, security is complex. So even something like identity access, and people are just trying to log in and do their work, that looks a little bit different if I'm a full-time employee versus if I'm a visiting contractor working with this company as well as a number of other companies, and making sure each of those scenarios is taken care of. And so it's really important to sort of think through that in that way and look at those use cases in your organization and, are we doing that? And so I love that aspect of those 1800 guides.
Yep. And one of the things that we're doing with this scenario is kind of show how different products and services can be composed together to achieve the outcome of the scenario. So NIST is not formally testing or evaluating or certifying any of these things, but it's all about achieving the outcome of the goal of this scenario. So as you could imagine, with that many number of participants in our project, building this out in our lab or even in the cloud, like in Microsoft Azure or AWS or GCP and so on, we want to have a high-level architecture where we can actually overlay the different technology that are available out there to compose a zero-trust kind of architectural solution. So we broke it down into a couple of key area. On the left side of the slide, you'll see the entity, I call it the subject, the user identity, the devices, and the workload themselves. Think about service-to-service kind of interaction, like containers to containers. Everything has an identity. So think of that as like the identity kind of area. And on the right side, you got the resource. This is the things that you want to allow access to. And in the middle, that's kind of where these zero trust specific components kind of come in. And some of these technologies you may already have deployed within your organization. It's about identifying gaps that is missing within that view that will allow you to express some kind of access policy and be able to enforce it at different levels, isn't it? Being able to enforce at the identity level, at the endpoint level, at the application level, and so on. And all of this is, at the end of the day, is how do you orchestrate all of this, kind of make it work to support your policy? And data is one of those layers that's going to be across the whole organization, and then leveraging other technology you have already, like security analytics, and how to feed that back to your policy engine, be able to make informed decision to access them.
Yeah, and one of the things on that one is just that central piece is so important of that policy, because you want to have that unified policy so that you don't have seams that the attackers can exploit. And the way I kind of think about this, because I'm just kind of a geek in a lot of ways, not just a tech geek, is it's like a subject, a verb, and an object. What are you trying to get access to? And then we're going to apply some policy before we do that. And there is for this particular diagram, there is a Microsoft overlay on this. It's also in the cyber reference architecture. And there is a link to that blog there as well, where we kind of explain and talk about the participation from Microsoft in the project.
And also, if you go to our project page and look at the documentation, we have the exact diagram with all of the other technology that we're using in the lab overlay on top of it as well. So what's the output of our project? It's a NIST special publication, 1800s, and it's kind of organized for different type of audience. You've got content for the security expert, the architect for the organization that need to kind of understand the big pictures, and if you got the implementation guide, these are the people on the ground that's going to be able to deploy or test some of this technology. And then we focus on the functional demonstration, the use case scenario that I talked about. So that's really how we are looking at all of these different implementation. We have about 19 of them, in our project. So we kind of go through those use case scenario. And then finally, on the security compliance side, we also map the capabilities of zero trust to a catalog of security controls. In our case, we're using the NIST 800-53. But also we map it to the NIST cybersecurity framework, which is a high-level framework that talks about, outcome and how can zero trust actually help you achieve the outcome of managing risk across your organization as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Mark.
Thank you, Murugiah. So now we're going to get into the promised 10 controls. There are 10 on the slide. We didn't quite number them exactly in that way, so apologies for that. But when starting at the top there, where it says top priority, first thing I wanted to emphasize, very, very, very important, is with the advent of ransomware and extortion attacks, where they're not trying to steal your data to sell it to somebody else. They're actually stopping your business processes and making you pay them, right? So not stealing your money, they're making you pay them. So technically, I guess they are, but they're making you be a part of it. A big part of how they do that is by making sure you don't have access to your systems. And restoring a backup is something that will cause them to not get paid, which is a good thing. So it's critical to be able to bring your systems back online if they are wiped clean. So that is the #1 control nowadays to think about, is make sure that you have a backup, but extremely importantly, that you can restore it, that you can bring that business system back online for all the things that if you were wiped clean, you ask the business leaders, what would you bring back first? What is the thing that you need tomorrow first to be able to do? Is it to pay our suppliers? Is it to collect money from our customers? Is it to run the life support systems? Is it to run this particular highway safety application? Is it to make sure that the online banking application is up? What matters to your organization? And then make sure that you have the ability to bring that back from a complete shutdown. So that's the number one control to put on your list. Then we start moving into those technical pillars there. Secure identities and access. Attackers don't break in, they log in, right? They are using your accounts and identities because it's easier, right? They're using your passwords especially because it's easier. So getting to the point where you have strong authentication, phishing-resistant authentication, that even if your user does make a mistake, assuming that they do make a mistake, that the attackers are not able to impersonate that user and use their account, or that admin especially. Conditional access, to be able to apply that policy, that adaptive access, that policy in that center of that diagram, and make sure that you're able to enforce that across all of the network and identity access paths that you have. Privilege administration, losing one particular user, you lose some business data, it's not good. Losing an IT administrator or other privileged account that works with business critical systems, that's a lot more business damage. So you want to make sure that you put extra focus on those very, very powerful accounts in your environment. The difference between losing a sheep and losing a shepherd is just a bigger scale of loss. And so there's a couple key controls there. Local admin password solution sets up random, unique passwords on every single computer, and then allows you through Intune nowadays to manage those. That's a second generation of a tool that used to be a standalone on-prem AD tool. Privileged identity management. Let's make sure we're not carrying around that master key ring with access to everything all the time. Let's make sure that we are only giving out those privileges when they're needed, so that if the attacker gets that account, they don't have free access to everything. They have to fight for every inch of the way and run the risk of getting detected and kicked out. Very important. Moving over to security operations. The front door for your users on how they get to actually access your stuff is through email, endpoint, and identity. People send around links to SharePoint. They log in. They are using their endpoint. The attackers have shifted to that same front door. So the front door that your users use is the same one the attackers do. They are not coming in over the firewall anymore. They are coming in over email, identity, and endpoint. So you need visibility there. You need the ability to respond there so you can take care of those things quickly. The more time the attackers have, the more time they have to mess with your stuff, do damage, get access to things, discover things they didn't know were there. So very important to limit that time. Infrastructure and development security, got to make sure it's a very complex thing. Y'all manage servers, containers, all that kind of stuff, right? So you know how complex that is. So there's no one prescriptive thing. So the one thing that we do recommend there is get a posture management tool in there like Microsoft Exposure Management to see what are the challenges in your particular environment, report on those, prioritize those, the attack paths, et cetera, and then work that just like you would work any other case queue, whether it's the security operations folks working on alerts and detections, or whether it's just technical tasks in a CMDB type of queue. So make sure that you're working those down and you have that visibility. Data security and governance, you've got to track your data. You've got to know where it is, especially in today's age of AI. You guys have seen some AI talks, right? Okay, yeah. So biggest thing about AI is that the LLMs really don't know how to follow deterministic rules, right? They generate a new response every time you run them. They're a dynamic type of coding. It's a new type of thing. And so you need to have all these application wrappers around that protect it and say, if this user doesn't have access to the data, don't give it to the model because it might give it to the user, right? So that's basically how M365 Copilot and others put those controls in place. But in order to do that, you need to have your permissions on your data. You need to have your tagging, your classifications, who has access to it. Otherwise, Copilot doesn't know who it should or shouldn't give the data to, and to whether or not to let the model process that as part of its response. And so it's very critical to have that identification and make sure you're integrating that in the data lifecycle as it's created, as it's modified, as it's updated, and you've got to have that tagging and permissioning set up. IoT and OT security. Not a lot that you can do in these spaces. This is often old, very limited function devices. So you have to basically do a lot of monitoring, a lot of isolation if you do have those devices. Most folks have IoT, some have OT. So with that, I will stop talking and let Ulf give us some real-world experience.
Okay, are we all good? Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Literally, 4 years ago in November, I gathered a small team and said, we need to rethink about getting away from user ID and password. So we took a bold strategic direction and said, let's go passwordless. And you know, as a bank, we have a lot of legacy and we have a lot of leading edge stuff all mixed together. So based on that, in that meeting, we had 3 printed papers on the table. It was the cybersecurity reference architecture from Microsoft. There were 2 papers from NIST. It was the cybersecurity framework and the zero trust architecture. So we started to look at these and we said, oh, these are overwhelming. so let's group them. So we started up, we all have users, right? So we agreed on user is something we need to zero trust. And by the way, when we sat in around the table there, was zero trust is a bit negative, right? So we rephrased it to always verify, which is much more welcoming. You're welcome, but you need to identify who you are. So we have the users. What do they use? Well, that is the various of devices. I wish we would have fewer, but we are very, yeah, we have all kind of devices. And we know that these are logging on to something. So we started to draft what we call the bigger picture. And the bigger picture, now you need to follow me because I don't have any slide. It's better to have this dialogue here. So we have the user, the devices, the network sits on infrastructure, and that leads you to the application, and there you have the data, right? And in the middle, you have the enforcement policy point, which is the Entra ID. So when we start to look at this, okay, now it makes sense, and we started to look at, all right, so the first use case or minimal viable product we had was, let's remove my ID, employee ID, and password, and use a biometric login. So we took and there are 3 components that need to match now. It's my enrolled PC, managed PC, it's my employee ID, and it's the biometric. And then, of course, you have a couple of people who say, well, I don't go biometric, I go PIN code. And I can talk an hour about how much better PIN code is than password, because you never roam a PIN code of a network, right? So that was the first use case. And then we said, what we did was that we also, when you do the login, you look at the creation of we can call it a ticket. That's a claim token. The claim token we use to access resources. So this is exactly what has already been mentioned, so I don't need to repeat that. But we use that claim token to grant access. But so that was the first step, so to say. Then we sat down and looked at, okay, so besides the PC login, we can use the same claim token for VPN access. Yeah, no big deal. The thing really started when we set up the conditional access, all the policies, right? Where do you log in from? What is the device updated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we realized this will be a tremendous important function. So we created a group dedicated to fine-tune and develop and adapt conditional access over time. So for example, if you work from home, we know your IP address, and then you are not allowed to perform monetary transaction, for example, right? Or if you sit and, like you like to do here in the US, you take you to Starbucks, no, you are not allowed to log into any sensitive data, right? So, and what we do right now is that the same claim token, we also have to have the application to verify that it has been a proper and granted login to the resource. The resource can, in this case, be a core banking application, it can be collaboration tool, it can be a SaaS application. And so we need to have this seamless access in the Zero Trust approach for the on-prem application, the cloud-based application, or SaaS application. And this is quite complicated, but my point here is really that you find out in these pillars I mentioned, from the end user all the way to the application and data, you need to find what are the elements and the building blocks, technology building blocks for the Zero Trust, right? So let's see here. So these are a couple of absolutely key control that we have applied. But there's one thing I would like to mention, going back to what you mentioned, Mark. If there is a ransomware attack, we figured out in this always verify, the Zero Trust journey, we need to practice, otherwise we don't know if it works, right? We have set up a Zero Trust, but we don't know if it works. So we came up with a concept which is called Major Incident Response Plan Playbooks. And what that all is, it's all about injecting ransomware into your test environment. Don't make any mistakes. And that is really amazing to see, where we go from vertical BCP activities to a more horizontal, where business people come in, experts, technology people, you know, the risk people. Suddenly internal audit shows up and say, oh, what's going on here? And we're doing fine. So this is, you know, when you have a targeted attack simulation, ransomware, deep into a Windows environment, what do? Well, you need to isolate. Don't kick the adversary out. That's a very, very bad move. Isolate the environment, and then you send in the incident response team. In parallel to that, you take in the specialists to rebuild the environment that has been affected. So that is super important to add into this Zero Trust journey as well. And I should not forget two other things. And on my way walking to the conference today, I said, well, is it at 80-20 or 60-40? Let's say it's at 60-40, no 80-20. So 80% of the time is to prepare the organization for Zero Trust. 80% of the time is to prepare the organization for Zero Trust. What does it mean? It's completely new task. Suddenly you call the service center, my camera doesn't work. How many of these calls did I have before when I'm back from vacation, I have forgot my password, right? So we transformed the organization, we have adoption programs, we have Q&A sessions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the starting point we had, which was successful, that was the customer and the customer's data and assets. That is the most and the highest priority we have within security and within a bank. So with that said, so that is very much about the multi-factor authentication, conditional access, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, the last part here is where we have the tier 0. They're completely disconnected. They don't have any access to internet at all. And you can imagine who these are. So the other one is the security operations team, the SOC team, et cetera. So they have also, as a result of this Zero Trust journey, or Always Verified journey, they have started up something that they call for detection engineering. So they focus really on the ability now, together with the associated Defender products, to improve the ability to detect any abnormal behavior, isolate, and basically perform the analytics around it. So here comes the Defender that is for endpoint, that is deployed now in our Linux, Windows, and also PC. So the first two were the server side, the other ones are the PC end user devices. We also have Defender for Identity to detect any anomaly. But I should not go into all this. But it's super important that you map out, this is what is available in the Defender family, and then start to activate what is the most important ones to start to add into this. Because this is the result. Zero trust, as already been mentioned, is you can't Google and buy it from Amazon. It is a concept that really goes on, and it needs to be also accepted and understood in the organization. And the last one, I would say, in a bank, you know, highly regulated, we are, do any one of you know IKEA? Yeah, so if you buy something that is leaning, you go back and you get a new one and a sausage, right? At the bank, you cannot have that. Well, I have fixed your data again. So we are so dependent on trust and 100% control of data and the state of data, monitoring the data, retention period of data. And we create tons of data every day, and we need to have control of that. So that is basically what we do. So one thing we added here, and I want you all to do that as well, now when you go home and plan for the Q1 next year roadmap, that is implement a classification of your data. So if you have a business application, you need to do the business impact analysis to determine, because that has an impact on the methodology you will apply for protect data by encryption, the logging, the monitoring. When you do all the mails and PowerPoint and et cetera, there is also, as we have now, I must, every time I mail anyone, I need to classify that mail. So that is super, super important as well. And I hand over.
Thank you. Yeah, so we're getting close to the end of the session, so we're going to try to summarize and provide some insight. At least I'm going to start, and I'm sure my colleagues are going to chime in as well. So as part of the project, you know, as we're building out the solution, the labs, and this integration, there's a number of things that we observe, you know, toward the end. The first thing to kind of get started on this journey is you need to understand where your data is, where your resources, the thing that you want to protect, you know, all the asset and so on and so forth. Without that, it's kind of hard to define the policy, you know, to set the access policy. Understand the capabilities that you already have. You know, you have a lot of the security tools available. Leverage, turn those features on, use them first and orchestrate them before you go out and buy additional things. You know, only buy the thing that's going to fill the gaps to allow you to achieve zero trust. And always it's risk-based. You can't boil the ocean here. You know, start with the things that's most critical to you. You know, do risk-based approach and you know, and evolve over time. And then that, you know, that access policy, you know, be able to understand your data flow, be able to understand criticality of your data and those kind of things, really helpful for you to kind of prioritize and come up with some of these initial implementation. And zero trust is something that's not just about technology, it's people and process as well. Because, you know, without a policy, a lot of these things not going to work. You know, Ulf mentioned verification, isn't it? You know, once you deploy this, make sure that it's working the way you intend it to work. You know, run through the scenario as well. Make sure that your investment are being, you know, being used properly, and continuously improve on this. You know, you can't achieve this. It's going to be a journey. It's like running a marathon. And some of the challenges that we face as we're looking at this is, again, it's not about the product, it's about people, process, technology. So you have to break down the barrier, break down the silo between all your different teams. You know, you've got the application team, your network team, your endpoint team. Zero Trust actually are forcing all those different folks to kind of come together to help compose a policy you're going to have to implement. And it's also technology integration. You know, there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of things out there. So it's about how do you bring all these pieces together, work with your, you know, with the different team within your organization, kind of understand that. And then at the end of the day, it's all about the data. You know, if you don't know your data, you don't know where it is and the impact of that data, criticality of the data, it's kind of hard to enforce some of this policy. And resource is always challenging, you know, as you're building these things out. So make sure you align, you know, your objective, your zero trust journey with other business objectives that you want to achieve, like, you know, you can enable more use case scenario for your user and those kind of things. Zero Trust actually is going to help you do that. It's going to help you mitigate incidents, should you have like a ransomware attack and so on and so forth. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mark.
Thank you much. And I just want to kind of emphasize, it's 80% people, process. Especially, small organizations, only a couple of IT folks, people tend to have a good picture of the whole thing. When you get into a larger organization, people get specialized, they go deeper on their skill sets, deeper on the tools, but then they sort of lose track of the big picture. It's really important to be able to secure effectively that you maintain that big picture. The other thing that's really critical is that being able to get the business support that you have, whether it's funding, approval for time, approval to make changes to the business processes, you've got to have the buy-in from your leaders, right? The business leaders have to say, yes, we're going to do zero trust. Yes, we're going to implement these controls. Yes, we're going to make people do MFA and other phish-resistant things, because that is critical to the success of it. And so we put together these zero trust business scenarios to help you with that, because this is the promises that we think that that security teams should be making to the organizational leadership, that these are the promises we're making. These are the things that the business leaders should be asking of the security team. These are the security assurances I expect from you. And put it in terms, simple human terms that business leaders can understand. I want to rapidly and securely adopt this AI thing while keeping my data safe. I want people to do their job securely from anywhere, and that includes contractors and all those different scenarios that Murugiah mentioned. I want to minimize the business damage from those security incidents, starting with the email endpoint identity, but then growing out to all of the other ones as well. Identifying and protecting those business critical assets, which is a very collaborative approach with the business teams to help them. The business teams have to tell you what is important, then the technology teams have to tell you what that actually means and what systems that's composed of, what data that's composed of, and then the security folks help with the securing it, threat modeling it, planning the mitigations, and working with folks. And so it's very, very collaborative process. Continuously improving the security posture and compliance. The attackers do not sit still. They get paid very well to attack you, whether as an individual independent contractor, whether as part of a nation state, whether as part of a criminal gang. This is their daily job. They will not get blocked and then give up. They will get blocked and they'll try something new to keep doing the thing that they know how to do. So we have to be constantly improving not only the security posture, we also have to keep the auditors happy. Last thing you want is an unhappy auditor. If anyone has ever been through an audit failure, it's not as bad as a security incident, but it's not a lot better. So this will help you with those languages to get that justification. And so what we're asking you here today to do is start with these top 10 controls. They are simple, straightforward, the most impactful things that you can do in each of those areas, and then keep going. It's the beginning of a journey. It will be going on for a long time. You look at Microsoft, our Secure Future Initiative, SFI, that is essentially a zero trust initiative for what we need as an organization and the priorities that we have currently at this point in time. We've been doing the zero trust thing for a long time and have addressed a lot of these basic controls, and now we're on to much more advanced controls that we need to go up against some of the top adversaries in the world. And so, this is a journey that you will be on for a long time. And we document all of our lessons learned through the Zero Trust Adoption Framework, the Cyber Reference Architecture, the SAF, all those links are there. Slides will be downloadable. NIST has some excellent guidance, all the 1800 guides that tell you how to do it, as well as the 800 guide on kind of what the big picture you're building is. So lots of different ways to guide this journey. They all generally take you to the same place. There's not like there's incompatibilities there. So keep that in mind. And then here's some of the resources on it. Some of those blogs that we mentioned, as well as the project page for the NIST one, some of the zero trust and security principles that, and not all those links are visible on the slide. You're welcome to take a picture, but just download the slide would be easier. But take a picture, remind yourself, who knows? But lots and lots of resources there to guide you on your journey and help you with that. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and thank my co-presenters. Murugiah, very much appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Ulf, thank you for being on the stage. And thank you all for attending and watching. We really appreciate it.